Welcome to Appen Media's Georgia Politics Podcast. I am Lindsay Coates, and today I'm joined by Ken Lawler. He is the board chair for Fair Districts Georgia Foundation. It's a nonpartisan group devoted to ending both racial and partisan gerrymandering. Welcome today. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you, Lindsay. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started. I wanted to find out a little bit more I have gone to the Fair District site, Fair District Georgia site previously, for information needed for various interviews or conversations that I was having. But you tell us, how did you get involved? What do they do? What does it mean, for a group like this that is focused on nonpartisan map drawing and I'll let you take it from there.
No, great. Thank you for that. It's a group that's been around since about 2018, formally incorporated 2018. We do a lot of we kind of have different missions, but at the end of the day, we're all about trying to reform the process for redistricting in Georgia. And that means doing a lot of research around election data, around mapping, around all that kind of falls together. So we have a big research effort that we do. We have an educational arm that deals with putting on educational programs, working with school systems on educating around this particular aspect of civics education. We do outreach to communities where we go out into the communities and talk about mapping. And then we also have a direct advocacy arm, which really gets in, and that's the Fair Districts Georgia part of it. We have a 501(c)(4) that advocates right at the legislature. We get in and actually talk to legislators about if they're drawing a map, is it fair or is it not fair? And we ask for reform legislation to be passed in the state of Georgia, some national, but mostly we're focused on the Georgia legislature, the Georgia Assembly.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And part of what the organization has done has teamed up with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project,
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah, back in 2021. Yes, exactly right.
Okay. So talk to us about that project. How do a million simulated maps let you say a map was engineered or just unlucky? Like, talk to us about that project and what it means for what we're doing here in Georgia, you're doing here in Georgia.
Yeah, that's a great question. That was an effort that we started in 2021. Princeton was doing this work across the country. We reached out to them and said, "Look, would you please prioritize Georgia? Because we would like to bring in this kind of heavy research that we don't have the capability to do ourselves at the time, right?" And what you can do with simulated maps is you're trying to discover really the natural lay of the land in terms of maps. I mean, maps get drawn largely for political purposes in Georgia, right? I mean, it's a political game, right? We want to stop that. The question is, how can you tell whether a map is fair or not? Like, what is a fair map in the first place? Well, you have to figure out statistically what's the profile of Georgia as a state politically, but also demographically, right? So, so in a state like Georgia, think about it this way. We're a swing state. Since 2018, our statewide elections, president, U.S. Senate, governor, they're swing elections. They're flipping back and forth between Democrat and Republican, and the win margins are very narrow, like only a couple points, 2 to 3 points win margin in those races, right? So we're a swing state. So you could say, well, shouldn't Georgia, if we're a swing state 50-50, shouldn't there be half the districts for Republicans and half for Democrats? The answer is no, because Democrats are clustered in cities, Republicans are more spread out. So you if you so the maps you're not going to have every single district in Georgia be 50-50. It can't be done, right?
Right.
You
Right.
cannot find a Republican district in DeKalb County. You can't find Democratic districts in some of the outlying rural areas of the state. So you have to figure out what the natural political we call it political geography. What's the natural distribution of voters across the state based on how they vote, right? And you can look at
Mhm.
that from a demographics perspective, like what's the natural distribution of white voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters. You can also look at that distribution based on political preference. How do people tend to vote in those elections, right? So when you draw a million maps at random, you basically discover that. If you draw these maps, they have no intent built into them. There's no political intent in drawing a million maps. Today, the legislature draws a map. They have a political plan. They want to win so many districts. But by looking at this neutral map simulation, you can say, well, the right number of districts isn't, the right number of districts for Republicans should be in this range. The right number for Democrats, the natural number should be in this range. Key point is there should be more competitive districts in Georgia. We are a competitive state, and there are regions in Georgia that are very competitive. But if your maps are drawn to eliminate competition, as ours have been, right, then you end up with basically a rigged election from a mapping point of view, right? So the
Mhm.
million map simulation is to discover the natural political geography of the state, right? Now that
Okay.
work that we did with Princeton was kind of it was a one-shot deal in 2021. It needs to be updated because that relied on older election data. So we're working on some of that right now. There are other groups that have similar platforms as Princeton. The Princeton group has shifted to another model. So we're working on updating those with more recent election data so we can have an updated view of what the natural political geography of the state looks like. But
Okay.
those tools of building these large, they call them ensembles of maps or collections. These are the state-of-the-art tools that have been used in court cases across the country to adjudicate fairness in maps in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, other states that have gone to court to fight maps in state court or federal court. These are the state-of-the-art tools when you draw these large collections of maps at random. They fit all the normal criteria, but you can discover, is the map an outlier? Is the map that somebody drew an outlier compared to what's natural? And that's the whole idea of these million maps or 100,000 maps or whatever you want to draw.
To try to help figure
Yeah.
out where there's the discrepancies for a fair map.
Right,
And
exactly.
fair is determined by, as you mentioned, voting. Talk to me about that again to explain what it means for it to be fair.
Yeah. So what we use is for political data, we use the statewide elections for governor, Senate, US Senate, and president. And we look at those elections from 2018 all the way through 2024. So that's about 6 elections that are counted in there, right? We've had senates, we've had runoffs, right? That if you look at how every precinct in Georgia has voted on average in those elections, it's remarkably stable. It's not exactly the same, but it shifts a little bit. But you can get a pretty good view of, where the Democratic areas are, where are voters preferring Democratic candidates versus voters favoring Republican candidates, right? And so you use that data to figure out if I draw a random map, let's say one of these 1 million maps, what is that? What's the profile of that map in terms of how many districts would lean Democrat, how many would lean Republican, and how many would be in the middle that would be competitive,
It would be competitive.
right?
That's
And
right.
so if I draw a million of those, I get a bell-shaped curve, a statistical profile that says, so and I'll give you an example, right? In the state Senate, for example, when we did the work in 2021 around this, we said, the range of Democrat to Republican districts. I'm gonna use a nomenclature that it was how many seats were extra for each side, right? So in
Hmm.
in that map, the range, if you took a million maps, the range of 98% of that million maps, the range was from +1 seat for the Republicans, a 1 seat edge, up to about +4. So it's a pretty
Okay.
narrow range, right? Which means
Yeah,
the
that's not a gosh.
Democrats had a -1 to a -4. That's the natural distribution. The center point, the ideal close representation would be around +2 or +3. So the map leans naturally slightly to the right in Georgia, but it's still pretty close. The other key thing is it would be a lot more competitive districts in there. Right now, that state senate map has like one competitive district. The right number is more like three, two, three, two to four should be competitive, right? And so that's how the million maps determine what the natural range is. So when the state senate map was drawn in 2021 post census, the Republicans drew a map that was a +5 for them, and that was outside the boundary. So we said that's an outlier. The range
Mhm.
is 2 to 4. Excuse me, the range is 1 to 4. The best would be 2 to 3. You drew a 5. That map fails. It was graded
Right.
an F for that reason, that it was so far tilted one side
Which
and
map
not
was that
enough
again? It
competition.
was
It was a +5 for the Republicans, right?
in Georgia.
In Georgia, in
Yeah. Okay.
state
I
senate,
got it.
sorry,
Okay.
in Georgia, and it should have been somewhere between 1 and 4, but the best ideal would be more like 2, 3. But
Hmm.
compared to the range of the million maps, we never saw a 5, so it's
Yeah.
clearly an outlier, so it gets a bad grade,
Makes
right? The
sense.
state house map fared a little bit better. The state house map actually scored a B because it was closer to that
Oh,
distributional range, right?
yeah.
So that's the
Okay.
power of these big simulations is that you can figure out what natural is and compare it to a map and say that map fits the Georgia profile, natural voter preferences, or it doesn't. how close is it to an outlier or the center point of that distribution? So that's what all this research stuff is. You
Yeah.
have to do this work, right? And now we're updating that work to go to look at the in 2021 we only had the 2020 presidential race and the 20 we had the 2018 governor's race and we had the 2020 president and Senate races, U.S. Senate. Now we're
Hmm.
going to add, through 24 to
More data.
the right, exactly. It'll give us an update on what the picture looks like.
Thank you for explaining that. Okay, so let's get to what is bringing us together and what's been what was kind of a landmark case, or is being, maybe that might be hyperbolic, but um, in Louisiana versus Kaye. So give us the accurate version. What did the court hold in that case? And just as important, I believe, is what it did not hold.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important question because a lot of politicians are out there talking about what this case means, and frankly, some of them are just misinterpreting what really happened there, right? It is a landmark case. Calais is a very big landmark case around the Voting Rights Act. The upshot is that they pretty much gutted the protections in Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that required districts to be drawn for minority voters under certain circumstances, right? So what did the court actually say? The case concerned a map out of Louisiana, right? And the Louisiana was required to draw a new map after 2021. Black voters challenged the map, saying there's not enough congressional districts for black voters here. A court agreed, a map was drawn, an election was run. White voters then turned around and said, wait a minute, now you're discriminating against us. So the
Mhm,
court took the case to decide what is the role of race when it comes to redistricting. That's what the court was trying to figure out, right?
mhm,
So what they did was it's actually somewhat surgical, but it's a precise ruling. What the court said was we're going to raise the bar on on what it takes to prove a case of racial discrimination in mapping. Okay,
okay,
so the court said if you want to prove because the original deal was black voters raised the original case and said you've discriminated against us. We want another district for black voters. The court has changed the rules, really raised the bar. So what they said was, first of all, if you're a plaintiff and you want to bring a case, you have to show a strong inference of discrimination. It used to be you just have to show that the map was discriminatory. Now they're saying you have to show that somehow this is intended, that the discrimination was inferred, was implied in what they're trying to do, right? The other thing, which is very, very tricky, is the court said, if you want to bring a case that says you think you've been racially discriminated, you have to disentangle the racial effect from the map from the partisan intent of the map. Maps are drawn for political purposes. And what the court said was, if a state can show you that they drew this map for political purposes, and then that takes precedence over your demographic concern. So the court has essentially elevated partisan gerrymandering, the partisan interest,
mhm,
above the racial interest. So now they've made it almost impossible to show there's a case. In theory, they said the Voting Rights Act is still there, the words are still there. The effective, though, is the act doesn't work anymore. And in her dissent, I think it was
Hagen.
Kagan said it's a dead letter.
Mhm,
You've broken it, right? So the court, if you read the opinion, the court goes through this kind of tortured logic of how they've rewritten the rules, right? And they've made the rules much tighter. What does it take to prove a case for racial discrimination? Once they rewrote the rules, then they turned around and said, okay, because of those rules, the Louisiana map is unconstitutional. So they rewrote the rules, right? So they've made
yeah.
it much harder to prove a case. What they didn't say, though, was, do you have a question? Or should I?
No, I mean, for me, this is where I get a little worked up about it too, because it's as though they've set this impossible precedent. And to be able to set, like, to determine that these maps are, nobody's out loud in a room. There's not a bunch of Republicans in a room saying we're going to rate that they're going to racially discriminate. But when you're focusing clearly, and this is happening across the nation, when you're clearly focusing on those minority districts and trying to crack those in particular, how is it not racially focused?
Right.
Like,
And the court basically said we are going to elevate partisan interest of the state in drawing a map above your
Hmm.
interest in a demographically diverse map. That's the effect of the decision, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, they said that if you're going to prove your case, you now have to show that there's another map that's better for minority voters that has the same political outcome as the map the state draw. That's nearly impossible. Okay,
Right. Right.
because black voters tend to vote, and minority voters, but blacks in particular in Georgia, tend to vote largely for Democrats. So
Right.
they're asking you to disentangle things that can't be disentangled, right? They
Right.
also said that if you show an alternate map that you think is a better map, you can't use race as a criterion in drawing that map. Okay, so they've created an unsolvable puzzle, right?
Right.
But
Right.
that's right. Now, so that it raises the bar on proving a case. So it, but now let's say, what does it not do? I mean, again, this is where people are running off the rails saying, well,
Yeah.
what's really going on here? They did not say that you can't consider race when drawing a map. They didn't say that. You can still consider race, but it cannot be the primary criteria in drawing a map. And by the way, that was true before Calais. That was an
Right.
existing precedent that you could not use race, which makes sense. You don't want to build racial discrimination into a map. But
Right.
the rules beforehand said if you can find a district, if you can find enough black voters to make a district, you should draw that district, right? Now they're saying, no, you don't have to do that anymore, right? And so what they did not say was, for example, that racial demographics cannot be considered. They didn't say that. You don't have to do race blind mapping. You can be conscious of race when you're drawing a map, okay? They did not say that racial discrimination claims will no longer be considered, but they've raised the bar so high that it's going to be impossible to make it work. But
Proving
they
that
did
is
not say no. The other thing is they have not declared any other state's maps wrong or unconstitutional, including Georgia's. They did
okay.
not touch Georgia's maps, right? So, if just to branch off, so what does it mean for Georgia? So the Georgia maps are already under appeal. They were under appeal from 2023, right? Georgia had the same situation. Maps were drawn in 2021. Maps were redrawn in 2023 because a federal court said this voted you violated the Voting Rights Act in 2021. Redraw state house, state senate, congressional maps, add districts for black voters. Okay, they
Yes.
did that. The state then appealed that decision. Actually, the plaintiffs did too. Both sides appealed that decision. That appeal is sitting out there in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals right now. Okay, has been sitting for a year or so because they were waiting to see. The 11th Circuit wanted to say,
What's going to
what's
happen?
Supreme Court going to say, right? So Georgia's maps are still under appeal.
Okay.
There's no
So
reason to change them at this point.
so yeah, okay. So we've already redrawn them. They're sitting in the court waiting to be approved. But now we've got Kemp, who has called special session that starts June 17th next
Mm.
week
Yep.
from where we're recording a week prior.
Right.
Um, and that was the day after the primary runoff. And
Hmm.
and Kat, so the session is going to be two topics, this redistricting and then QR ballot code fix, just for
They
other
threw a
people
couple other
to.
things in there lately too, just other
Oh, did they?
miscellaneous things,
Okay.
little
I must
things,
have missed
but
it.
yeah.
But why?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
why are we doing this now?
That is the heart of the question. That's a fantastic question, right? And so, I mean, I'm going to summarize it by saying, look, it's a partisan power grab, is all it
Yeah.
is. Why
Yeah.
do I say that? First of all, Georgia's maps are under appeal. Okay. Now, the state's going to win that appeal. Let's not fool ourselves. Based on the
Yeah.
Calais decision, the plaintiffs are going to, their complaint's going to probably not be considered. The state's going to win the appeal. But what did the state ask for? The state did not, the state asked for relief. They just said that decision that you made in 23 that caused us to draw these maps, which we've
Hmm.
already used once in an election in 2024, we just want relief from that decision. So let's imagine that the 11th Circuit says, yep, Georgia, you get relief. That does not order any new maps. It does not require any new maps. It simply leaves it as a choice to the legislature, to the lawmakers to say, or the state, you now don't have to abide by those maps. Keep them, change them, do whatever you want. So why would anybody want to change them, right?
If we've already put in the work and got them to where a Republican-led, elected leaders came up with them in the first place. So didn't they already do what they wanted to do with them?
Yes, and that's a critical point. The 2021 maps had a particular partisan unfairness towards Republicans. The F
Uh-huh.
map, the B map, the C map. But the grades were set. we told the legislature at the time, based on these fair benchmarks from Princeton, some of these maps are the Senate map fails, the House is closed, the congressional is still off by one, right? So that
Hmm.
that 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 partisan character of the map was set in 21. When they redrew the maps in 2023, they complied with the court order, but guess what they did? They evened the score. So the 2023 maps, I mean, it's very cynical. At least they admitted they were doing it right.
Yeah,
But what happened was every time they added a district for black voters, they said, "Oh, that's going to be a net new Democratic district. I better take one back over here." So they evened the score. So the 2023 maps have the same partisan imbalance that they had in 21. So they already have achieved their political objective, their partisan objective, even though they had to draw maps for black voters. So why change the maps again?
right.
And why now, when they're not even thinking about 2026, it's 28? What's the point?
Because they're
And the
about, they
only
feel as
point
though they're
would
about to lose
be, the only
power.
point would be, well, now we have a chance to ignore those old rules and draw better maps for our side. I hate to be cynical about this,
No,
but
I
the
think you're
only
being,
reason to draw these maps is to grab more seats
yep,
for your party. That's the only reason. And nobody, anyone who's running around saying we must comply with that decision, you've already complied. Though
right.
that decision from the Supreme Court did not invalidate any Georgia's maps. And all the state's going to be told, I believe, is you got relief from the old decision. Now you can decide what you want to do. But no one is going to order Georgia to make new maps in a court. That's not been done so far. And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm guessing that's not going to happen. So, special session, this is all about grabbing seats, basically,
Grabbing receipts. So right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Republicans hold a 9 to 5 edge
on
um,
Congress, on congressional
on
maps. That's correct.
congressional
Right.
seats.
Right.
So are they able to redo? They're able to redo those as well. Like,
Mhm.
what's the end game, I guess? Like, how much can they crack these districts even more to give a more partisan Republican
I mean,
sweep?
it depends on how bold they want to be.
Yeah.
We actually don't speculate on drawing
Okay.
maps and saying, well, what's the worst case? I mean, other people are worried about that.
Okay.
We don't actually, we don't propose a map. We propose standards to measure maps and we propose a fair process, but we don't
Excellent.
emphasize this is the map you should draw, right? I
Okay.
will tell you this, I will tell you that in 2021, when the congressional map was being drawn, the million map simulation said, even though we're a swing state, it shouldn't be 7-7. The fairest map is actually 8 Republicans, 6 Democrats, based on the clustering of Democrats and the spread out of Republicans.
Sounds good.
That's actually the fairest, the highest grade map. The A map would have been an 8-6. The Democrats proposed a 7-7 map, okay,
Hmm.
in 2021, the Democratic caucus. The Republicans posed a 9-5. I personally stood up and said, neither one of these maps is good. I want the 8-6. That's the best one. But we got the 9-5. Now, could they switch? Could they do more damage? Could they push it even farther? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you could
Oh,
draw
really?
maps, it's you could you I've seen people playing around drawing maps. You can probably create one or two more Republicans. You could probably draw a map that's like, that favors Democrats by 3 or 4 seats. It's possible theoretically. The districts are going to look weird, and the
Hmm.
representation is going to be like, am I in this district with these people over here? It's not going to make sense geographically, but it can be done, right?
It's already so confusing for people in which district they're in. And
And that is a key point, is that you're disrupting the relationship between voters and their elected officials.
yes,
These maps should be drawn to reflect the communities. The
right.
way to draw maps is to think about what's the community around, different parts of the state of Georgia. And communities are like, communities can be economic communities, social communities, university communities. I'll give you some weird examples, right?
Yeah, please.
The Atlanta University Center, a campus of schools, predominantly black schools in the southern, in the city of Atlanta, is a
Hmm.
nice little community that could be drawn. That could be a community that should be considered as a building block in any map that's being drawn for House, Senate, Congress, right?
Hmm.
The Vidalia onion farming belt, that's an economic community of interest where
Hmm.
there are people who have a strong economic interest, whatever county or counties that is, or whatever regions in those counties. That's an economic community. There's coastal communities. My neighborhood is 376 houses. should be a community. Guess what? It's cracked. Curiously enough,
Oh.
my neighborhood is cracked for no good reason, but all these little communities should be building blocks. So our view of how to draw fair maps is to say, stop trying to build a political outcome into these maps. Draw the maps based on communities. Think
Right.
of communities as building blocks because then you'll have less of an incentive to switch them all around, right? In the 2023 map drawing, here's a data point for you, right? When the maps were drawn in 2023 to comply with the court order, as I said, they made unnecessary changes, right? 500,000 voters got moved out of their House and state Senate and House districts. 500,000 approximately got moved unnecessarily. You could have complied with the court order because there were competing maps that did that without these partisan score evening maps, right? These I'll call them the partisan takebacks. 500,000 voters got moved around totally unnecessarily. That's a lot of disruption, right? And you want to build a relationship, and I think your legislator, your lawmaker has an interest in keeping that map stable because they want to have a relationship. They want to know who are my constituents.
That's a great point.
I want to get to know them so I can campaign again.
That's a great
So
point.
they don't, I would guess many of them don't want these changes,
Yeah.
but the powers that be are wanting, more seats. And so the maps get changed, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other piece of this, and this isn't, um, there's no proof that this is being done currently. Like there's no articles about it. But when Kemp announced the redistricting, he also said, and statewide races. He didn't specify any other state office elected by district, is what he said, but didn't specify which statewide would be reconsidered. I spoke with PSC Commissioner Peter Hubbard last week,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
he hinted that following his and Commissioner Johnson's statewide wins, sweeping wins, overwhelmingly sweeping wins, these are seats that are you have to live in the district to be elected. However, the whole state votes on them.
Right. Right.
And so he is saying that now those PSC maps are at risk for being redrawn as well. So for me, this is clearly, the dots are connected. Clearly, if they do go for these, that they are seeing that they're losing by um, m- major percentage margins. Um,
Hmm.
and so they want to change that up so that they stand more of a chance. Um, you know, would you see it that way too, if that was the way that it were to go? Do you think
No,
that
I don't see
those?
that. I don't see the point. Because the PSC vote is statewide,
Mhm.
there's not much difference in terms of the district map doesn't really decide the election as much, right? Where you might see those changes is if somebody
But what
says,
if
well, the,
sorry, what if they did change it to districts and you only the people that lived in the district vote instead of statewide?
then it would be very meaningful. But but
Okay.
but but that was another court case that was argued a few years back where the Georgia conservation voters and other people said this election model of you live in a district but you're elected statewide, that is a model that disadvantages black voters under the Voting Rights Act. That case was adjudicated. They won at the district court level. It was lost on appeal. And so the election model of statewide elections stands. The state could decide to change that, by the way. They could change the law to make the PSC a by district election, and then the map would make a big difference, right? Um, but where they could play games with that kind of a map is they really wanted to. They could say, okay, these two people that won seats that we don't like, why don't we
Hmm.
change the boundaries so they don't live in the district anymore? That they could do.
Hmm.
That could be a game that gets played. And that's actually what happened a little bit back in the 2021 cycle when those
Yeah,
maps were redrawn.
McBath,
There was a
Lucy McBath's
no, because
district.
she's a congressional person.
Oh, okay.
That's
I
the
was
case
thinking
there,
of,
right?
yeah, mixing races. Okay.
Yeah, no, no. But the Public Service Commission, there was a person who was trying to run she had announced, I think it's Patty Durant was the name of the person.
Yes.
She was a candidate who announced well early she wanted to run for Public Service Commission, right? And she lived in a particular part of the state, right? And so what happened was the map was redrawn, and the map drawers got a hold of her address and took that into account and changed the map, so she was not in that district anymore.
Yeah.
That was revealed in the court ruling. The court findings said, yeah, we knew where she lived. We pushed the boundary so she was outside the district. So that kind of game could be played.
Yeah.
But in terms of whoever runs in that district is going to have to win a statewide race, just like a
Right.
governor.
Okay.
So
As
I'm not sure what's
legislature.
going to happen with the PSC. I hadn't heard any news
None
about
of us
that.
do. Yeah.
But that would be if we see that, we'll obviously be looking for that gamesmanship thing, saying, okay, who's pushing who out of behind the boundary, right?
Right.
We could talk for another 10 minutes about another person in that area who cheats pretty badly, but I won't get into that now.
That's the down and dirty stuff that we
Yeah.
like.
No,
No, but
I don't like cheaters. I don't like cheaters.
I completely agree. It just sets a principle of telling the voters that your vote doesn't matter. We're gonna make this however we would like to
Right.
make it, is my interpretation of it as a
I mean,
voter. So yeah, so we don't know what the maps are. We don't know what the new state maps will look like. Nobody knows that yet because the session hasn't started. Um, but let's move into what outcomes could. Well, tell me about what were you wanting to pivot to again?
so we asked voters. All these people are running around, politicians are running around saying, here's, I want to draw these maps. We did a novel thing. We said, let's ask voters what they want on the redistricting. So we did a poll. We did, the second time we did the poll, second ever time people asked voters, what do you want out of redistricting in the first place? What's fair to you in the process, right? And so there are some really important key findings that I'll just share very quickly, right? The number one thing that voters want, 75%, literally across all parties, said, I want competitive elections. That's the number one finding.
Oh, wow.
Voters want, you know why? Because they want their voice to matter. If they're in a competitive election, if the election outcome is not predetermined by a map, guess what? I get my votes choose who runs this state, right? That's the number one thing. Number two is we asked, well, do you want maps to continue to reflect the diversity of Georgia, right? Should race matter? But we use diversity as a rule. Answer, 60% said yes. The map should reflect the diversity of Georgia, right? 64% said maps, we should change the law so that maps need to be drawn in a nonpartisan fashion. 64%. That's across all parties. And guess what? From we did the poll 4 years ago, we did it again in March of this year, right? The
Hmm.
largest growth in that particular finding was Republicans have now joined that tune. And so now across all parties, people want maps drawn in a nonpartisan fashion. The other thing we asked, we said, well, should maps be changed mid-decade, like they're thinking of doing?
Right.
The answer is a majority said no. So voters have said, I want competitive maps that represent me. They represent my communities. Yes, they should represent the diversity of Georgia. Don't redraw them mid-decade, right? So we use that poll input and said, if that's what voters want, let's talk about how we approach any map drawing in the session. First thing we did was we've said all along, we're objecting. There's no reason to draw maps, but we're making that argument publicly, press releases, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're going to draw maps. So then we have to be ready to judge these maps, right? And so, um, our policy is we want the maps to reflect the diversity of Georgia. This is called reflect. The maps should respect my communities. Again, economic communities, educational communities, but also communities of color or white voters. Think about the demographics should be reflected in the maps. Think about the big picture. Maps should be drawn so that the people we elect are a reflection of us. That's the whole point. People want a legislature that listens to them and reflects their political views and their community views and their community interests. That's what maps should do. They should not be driven so that one party wins or one party loses. And by the way, both parties are guilty of this. Go back far enough, you can see Democrats and Republicans both doing it. That's why we're nonpartisan. We say we're calling out all the cheaters, okay?
Yeah.
Right? And,
Yeah.
and and so the way we're thinking about this session is to say we're going to look at these maps. We're gonna try to apply some of these neutral benchmarks, right? That tell us how many districts should there be in a range for different characteristics of voters, either demographic characteristics or political preferences. We want to see more competition in the maps, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
we have tremendous problem with competitive maps in Georgia, right? In the 2024 election, here's some quick data points to illustrate the
Yeah,
problem.
please.
The when we did the work with Princeton in 2021, in the state house as the example, in case in point, the statistical range of how many competitive seats there should be in the state house. There's 180 districts in the house, right?
Hmm.
The range is between 11 and 20. So I'm going to choose 15 as just a talking point. 15 is the center. There should be 15 competitive seats in the state house. How many do you think there are right now? Six. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And there's
Yeah.
one kind of in the Senate. So call it seven for all 236 seats. Here's the point. If there were 15 competitive, neither party would have enough safe seats to win up front. That means the voters decide who runs the state house, who runs the state senate. That's how it should be. Not every district will be competitive. You can't draw Republican districts in DeKalb. You can't draw Democratic
Right.
districts in some outlying areas. But there's enough competitive territory in certain areas of the state, especially Metro North Atlanta, right, where there should be enough competitive seats. So we'll be looking for, are there enough competitive seats now?
Okay.
I'm skeptical we'll see
I was
them.
gonna
Okay.
say, and
But
where do
I'm
you
not going to
know?
prejudge, but I'm not going to prejudge, but I'll certainly we will be scoring those maps against the competitive benchmark. We'll be
Yeah.
scoring them for how well do they represent the current distribution of Republican Democratic preferences across the state, which again leans slightly to the right. But geography will tell us how many districts there ought to be in a range, right? We're going to ask how well do these maps reflect the diversity of Georgia, right? We know what the current map looks like. The 2023 maps were drawn with additional districts for black voters. That was good. Okay. What direction do the maps take from this point? Do they eliminate some of those districts? Do they work around them? One could guess that because the rules have been changed in their view, right, in the legislators'
Hmm.
view, that they now have permission to undo some of that to build maps in their favor. We might see a dramatic shift or we might not, but that's what we're going to be looking for in the sessions. We'll be judging these maps.
So, what does that look like for you? Are you attending these sessions at the Capitol? Are you and interacting with lawmakers constantly as this is going on? So, are you ramping up, I guess, is what I should
Oh,
say.
absolutely, absolutely. We are ramping up right now. We've got several things in motion. We're doing all this research work. We're trying to rerun the math
Yeah.
to update. We're not going to do a million maps, but but we'll do as many as we can because we have to look at Senate, House, Congress. We have our polling data that kind of tells us what voters want. We have reached out to the committee chairs and the leaders in the legislature, offering our help to help them score these maps in
Have
advance.
you heard back from anybody?
Not yet.
Okay.
We know the chairs of the committee. We've met with them before.
Hmm.
So we will be reaching out to offer our assistance. Most likely they'll say no, thank you, but then we will testify. We have an advocacy team who will be down at the Capitol actually testifying. We'll be scoring these maps. We'll be scoring them against benchmarks. We'll be comparing the new maps, whatever new maps we see, to the existing map and say directionally where are we going? Are we adding or subtracting districts for white voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, right? And from a demographic point of view, are we
Hmm.
adding or subtracting competitive districts? Are we adding or subtracting Republican Democratic districts? We will be producing reports that says for every district that was changed, what changed in that district, right? That helps people understand my district, what happened to my specific community, right?
Right.
So we're going to be we will be testifying in the hearings. We hope that they are going to have enough time for testimony. It's going to be a very short process. I'm
Hmm.
viewing this as going to be a bit of an assembly line. They want to get this stuff done as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
We will be testifying based on all this research stuff. We're running certain educational programs right now with various voting groups to say, this is what we think is going to happen. Here's what you can say. Here's how you should express your interests. So we've got a bunch of things going on. My hair's on fire, unless you can't tell. But there's a
I can
team
see.
of us, and look, we're all here. Here's the thing, people, we're all volunteers. Okay,
Right.
we're doing all
Right.
this work with pretty much, a handful, a dozen or so crazy volunteers who care passionately about reforming the system here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
post
needed.
the session, post session, we're thinking about what happens then. We run a pledge campaign where we ask candidates to pledge for a fair process. That's the only thing we do that's election related. And we will be updating that pledge campaign so that when voters go to the polls in November, they know which candidates have or haven't decided to pledge. We don't support those candidates. We don't campaign for them. We ask them to sign a pledge. We
Hmm.
publish the list. That's as far as we can go because we're not a PAC. We're not an action committee, right? We're an advocacy group, a
Right.
social welfare organization, and we're a research arm. The arm that I happen to chair is the research side that does all the numbers and the number crunching and the education stuff. And then our advocacy team are the folks who run the pledge, and they'll be down there testifying at the hearing, so at the
Great.
hearings. So we want our voices to be heard. We want lots of voters to come down there and talk about what they think. We know we based on our poll, we think we know what the average voter is going to say. And so
I
that's
was going
that's
to ask
how
you
we approach it.
what can between now and then, what does it look like for an average voter? What can we do? What should we do? We're overwhelmed right now with so much. So tell
Well,
us
I would
what
say
should.
first off, we have a page on our website. You look at our fairdistrictsga.org is our website. Okay. You go to our website on the front page, there's a link to a special session page, which we're setting up, which has a lot of resources on it. We've already published the poll data. We're going to be publishing whatever benchmarks we come up with. We will be scoring maps in real time as they are released and publishing those scores on the website. There will be downloadable files you can take and talk to your legislator about. We're encouraging people to get ready for that. We have a mapping section on our website where you can look at the current map and say, what does my current state house district look like? Put your address in here, see what communities I'm connected to. Just be aware of the starting point for this discussion, which is our current map, right?
Mhm.
And then when you look at what's changed, and we'll be publishing a from and to change graphic, you can then figure out what's going on.
Okay.
The other key thing that voters should do right now is they should be calling and writing the governor, Speaker Burns, Lieutenant Governor Jones, and the committee people and say, there's no need to do this. Common Cause has been running a campaign. They've now delivered, I think the number is 10,000 letters have been written to those folks saying, this is unnecessary. Stop the gerrymandering. Stop the madness, right?
Yeah.
That's something that voters should be saying right now. There is no reason. No one is requiring Georgia to do anything here.
Right. Right.
And you're working on maps for 28. What's the point of doing them now? Come on. This is
We've
you can
just
smell a
established.
cynical power play going on here, right?
Yeah, I was about to
So,
say I am definitely on the cynical side that that will change anything. It just feels as though Republican lawmakers for so long have been disconnected from populist opinion, not just on this issue, but on so many other things that are in Georgia. I mean, I had a conversation with Georgia Majority for gun safety, and when you have 70% of the population in Georgia wanting these things and pushing um, for that kind of legislation. It is just a huge disconnect from our elected leaders and and it's telling in your research as well from what voters are
right.
saying that they
We
want.
actually did some research on that particular issue. We looked and said, there have been some pretty controversial bills that have gone through this legislature, right? And
Yeah.
when you have a map that tilts towards one side, what would happen to some of those bills if the map had been fair and a
Yeah.
different legislator had been elected? And it
Hmm.
turns out that some of those bills, most notably the Life Act or the Heartbeat Bill and some of the gun loosening the gun regulations, might not have made it because those votes were very close
Hmm.
in a legislature that was already tilted to one side. They didn't have full support across. It was somewhat some party aligned votes, but a fair map might have changed some of those votes. And so
Yeah.
that's how you can tie this whole redistricting nerdy thing about mapping and data to everyday policy changes, right? So I mean, we're nonpartisan. We don't take a position on is the heartbeat bill good or bad? Is
Right.
the gun regulation good or bad? What we want is we want if voters are saying they want something in extraordinary numbers, the system should allow people to elect legislators who will do that for them. And we
Yeah.
don't have that, right? So I mean, again,
Right.
our maps are determining the outcome of the election. That's part of the problem. We look at it this way. Let me summarize this,
Yeah, please, and then we'll wrap
which,
up.
which is, look, what voters want in Georgia is free, fair, and secure elections. That covers the basis. They want free elections, fair elections, and secure elections. I can't imagine anybody thinking there's something missing from that idea, right? But free and fair elections require two things. There's voting procedures on the one hand, which is all the things about balloting and drop boxes and vote
Hmm.
counting and registration. That's all conduct of the election. You need that to be fair. But the other side of that coin is the map.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
have the fairest conduct of an election, but if the outcome has been predetermined for who runs the legislature, what are you voting on?
Right. Then
Free
what?
and fair elections need both things to work together. And so, no, here we are. Like it or not, fair maps are on the ballot this year, folks. They
Yeah.
are, right? And this redistricting war that kicked off last year in Texas and then spread across the country, we would hope Georgia would stay out of it. I guess we're going to get into it here. We're not going to affect this year's election directly, but indirectly, if voters see that there are shenanigans being played around these maps, we hope that they take that into account when they figure out who am I going to vote for my new state senator, my new congressional person, whatever, uh, in
Yeah.
November.
That's
So really, we just everybody wants free, fair, and secure elections, but it's hard to get them when the maps are rigged. That's the problem. So we
oh,
carry on.
uniquely Southern problem, it feels like. Um,
It's a
but
nationwide, it's really a nationwide problem.
it
There are
really
states
is.
that do terrible things on the Democratic side. Georgia did terrible things on the Democratic side in the past. It's a nationwide problem, and we need a big hammer to come down and just
Yeah, remove it from everything. And I like
right,
I'm good if it's one side, make it equal for both sides so that we're not sitting here
right,
feeling as
right,
though our vote does not matter when these
right,
maps are redrawn to not reflect my community and who we would like to represent us. So,
right.
Ken, thank you so much. This was very informative, very educational
You're
for
welcome.
something that's definitely making headlines, not just in Georgia, but like you mentioned, nationally. So,
Right,
thank you
right.
so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Excellent. I am Lindsay Coates with App and Media's Georgia Politics Podcast. Thanks for listening and can't wait for the next one. Thank you.